Yeah.
Now, of course, since we're talking about After Effects, we're definitely going to learn about keyframes. Keyframes are the primary way to actually create animation inside of an After Effects project. Just about every property of anything that you can apply inside of a composition inside of After Effects, you can keyframe. There are very few things that you can't. Now, to show you how and where to keyframe, let's start working with our Training Swoosh project. If it's not already open, open your AAA output comps and just double-click on the Training Swoosh project. Now, in the middle of our timeline, you'll see our current time indicator. Usually when I'm getting started with creating a project, I'll use the current time indicator as kind of a scrubbing tool. So I'll click on it and drag it through the timeline. This allows me to actually create a rough edit for when I want each of these elements to appear in the scene. Now, scrub with your current time indicator to around 8 seconds. That's when this word training appears in our project. Now we want to add a keyframe for the opacity of this layer. You can add keyframes in the timeline next to each parameter. So to show you what I mean, let's open the triangle for layer 2. And here we have transform and layer styles. Since this was an element created in Photoshop, there was a layer style that had been applied, and that's translated into After Effects. But let's concern ourselves with transform right now. So open those options. And in here, this is where I can add my keyframes. See these things that look like a stopwatch? That's what those are. They're for adding keyframes. So anything you see with a stopwatch next to it gives you the ability to record that parameter and that value for that parameter at that specific point in time. And the way that those work have to do with the current time indicator. So I want to make sure I'm right at the start of layer 2. So just to be sure, I'm going to select it in the timeline, and then I'll press I on my keyboard. When you press I and you have a layer selected, the current time indicator will always move to the endpoint of that layer. Now let's change the opacity of this layer to 0. So we can do this a number of ways. We can click directly on the value and type it, or we can click and drag. I generally like to click and drag, so I'm just going to click and drag. Now notice I can't see the word anymore. I still see the handles, but those aren't going to render. So let's add a keyframe for opacity. Now, since I want to move my current time indicator, I can click here in my time in the upper left corner of the timeline panel, or I can click here in the lower left corner of the composition panel. I'll just click the current time button in the bottom of the composition panel. Now, I want to move ahead about 12 frames. See, this project is 23.976 frames a second, or 24 frames a second. So 12 is a half a second. So I'm going to type plus 12. So you can type equations in here and it'll know, hey, you're just trying to move 12 frames further down the timeline. So when I click OK, now my time indicator is moved. Now, if you look to the left of my current time indicator, see this diamond shape that's kind of yellow? That's letting me know that I have a keyframe for that parameter. Once you've added a keyframe for a parameter, you'll notice that it looks like there's a box around the stopwatch. And you'll see a hand or like a line through the middle of the stopwatch. That's letting me know that that value has been recorded at some point in time. Now, if I change this value, since I have my current time indicator at a separate place in the timeline, I'm actually going to add a second keyframe. So let's click on the value for opacity and then just type in 100 and press enter or return. Now notice I have 2 keyframes in the timeline. As you continue to add keyframes to different elements, you'll navigate the timeline by using these navigation tools here on the left side. So I could click this left one to go to my previous keyframe or the right one to go to my next one. Anytime you see the keyframe sitting over here in the timeline, that's letting you know that your current time indicator is sitting directly on that keyframe. So if I scrub through, now you notice I'm not on that keyframe. So if I want to go back to the other one, I can just click that left arrow and it takes me to my previous keyframe. Now, if we scrub through, we can see the appearance of that word. Now, a lot of times for simple things like this, I like to just scrub. I want to copy these keyframes and paste them to all those other layers with the graphics. So to do that, I'm going to select both keyframes. One of the easiest ways to select multiple keyframes is to draw a lasso in the timeline. If you click off of one of the keyframes and just drag out and around, you'll automatically select both. Now I know they're selected because they're yellow. So I can press Command-C to copy, Control-C on Windows. Now I want to paste this fade to all those other layers. So I'm going to collapse layer 2 by closing its triangle, and I'll click on layer 3 and scroll down and shift click on my blue layer, which is layer 10. Now with all these layers selected, I can still use that I command to move my current time indicator to the start point of those layers. So I'll do that. Press I on your keyboard. Now, since I already copied all the keyframes, I can just press Command V or Control V to paste those keyframes to any of the layers that I have selected. Notice now all those graphics have disappeared. So what I want to do at this point in time is actually preview what we've created. Since I don't have this from current time selected, when I load up a RAM preview, it's automatically going to start playing from the beginning of the composition. So let's see what that looks like. It may take a second to load all these different frames. After Effects is going through and loading the frames into the RAM preview, and this green bar is giving me a status of those frames that actually get loaded. Now at any given time, I can press the space bar and begin playback of any of the frames that have been loaded in the composition. Since I want to see everything, I'm just going to go ahead and let it load all the way across the length of my comp. And then up here in the info panel, once the frames are loaded, we can see that the video is actually playing back in real time. And we have a fade for these layers. Now, if I wanted to create a fade out, I would just do something slightly different. So what I'm going to do is press the space bar to stop playback for a second. And since I still have all those layers selected, I'm going to press O on my keyboard to move to the out point. Now I want to move back a couple frames. So I'm just going to click and drag on my current time indicator. As I'm dragging, I can see the value change, and I'll drag to around 7 seconds, 12 frames. Press T on your keyboard to open the opacity settings. See, each one of these layer properties, you can quickly get to the different parameters by using quick key commands. And we'll explore all those commands throughout the rest of the course. For now, just know T stands for opacity. Now, since I already have a keyframe here that's valued at 100%, and I want to add another keyframe down here at my current time indicator with the same value, I'm not going to press the stopwatch button now, because if I do that, it'll just delete any keyframes that I have set for that specific parameter. What I need to do is click this button right here between my two navigational arrows. So let's click on that. That's going to add a keyframe at the current value for that specific parameter. So it's 100% for the opacity. Now I want to move my current time indicator to the end of the layer. I'm going to press O to move to that out point. Now let's change the opacity down from 100 to 0. Now notice we've automatically added more keyframes. I'm going to scroll up and down, and you can see it's been added to all the layers that I have selected. So this time I just want to preview the fade out. So I'm going to move my current time indicator to around 7 seconds. And in the RAM preview panel, I'm going to check this box that says from current time. Now when I load up my RAM preview, it's going to go ahead and load just those frames that I was missing and show me the fade out and my fade in of my other layer. So again, you can press the spacebar to stop playback at any given time. I definitely encourage you to continue going through the rest of this project and seeing what else you can do to add more keyframes and create animation inside of After Effects. Yeah.